We need more holidays with bonfires. Maybe not here in Southern California, but in general, more bonfires. England has Guy Fawkes Night, Ireland has Samhain, and in Catalonia, Spain, they have La Verbena de San Juan, or St. John's Eve on June 23rd. And in addition to bonfires, they eat what we're making today, coca de San Juan. So thank you to my Patreon patron Juan for bringing this baked good to my attention and letting me know a little bit about the holiday, the Feast of San Juan, this time on Tasting History. Now, for regular viewers of Tasting History, you might have noticed that was a brand new opening. It was made by viewer Matthew Bage, so thank you so much for making that, Matthew, and thank you for letting me use it. It's a little bit snazzier, definitely has a lot more images, kind of updating the channel, but I made sure that we kept Der Föhler in there. It's one of my favorite paintings, and we wouldn't be tasting history without it. Now, as I mentioned, today's episode is inspired and kind of brought to you by my Patreon patron, my old co-worker at Disney, and my friend, Juan Capdet. It is pretty cool when your friends and co-workers support you like Juan has, so thank you very much, Juan. So Juan is from a region of Spain called Catalunya or Catalonia, and in it they celebrate this Feast of San Juan or the Feast of St. John. It's actually celebrated all over Europe, but specifically he was telling me how they celebrate it in Catalonia, and it sounds really cool, kind of crazy, but we'll get to that later. But every year they enjoy these cocas, coca de San Juan. They're all different types of these kind of sweet flatbreads with different toppings, and they have all sorts of different toppings, from kind of the savory llardón, or basically chicharrones or pork rinds, to pine nuts, to different nuts, to pastry cream and other sweets, and then of course candied fruit like the one that we're making today. And there are basically just as many coca de San Juan as there are villages and bakeries in the region, so it was hard to kind of pick which one to do, and it was also hard to find an old recipe. I found several that kind of worked, so this recipe is kind of an amalgam of those old recipes from the 1920s, along with some of the more traditional ways of actually decorating the cake. So for this coca, what you'll need is 2.5 cups or 300 grams bread flour, 14 grams dry yeast, a half cup or 100 grams sugar, 4 tablespoons or 55 grams of lard or butter. All of the old recipes use lard, that's what I'm going to be using, but butter works just as well. 3 eggs, 2 for the dough and 1 for an egg wash, a half cup or 120 milliliters of whole milk, the zest of half a lemon, a quarter cup or 60 milliliters of anisette. That is an anise-flavored liqueur that also is rather sweet. So unlike Sambuca, which is just a little bit sweet, anisette is much sweeter. So you can use that, or you can just use some regular kind of powdered anise in there if you want. Just use a little bit though, because it goes a long way. A half teaspoon of salt, a quarter cup or 30 grams pine nuts, and an assortment of candied fruit. I'm using cherries, oranges, pears, and apricots, but you can use whatever you want. So first, warm your milk to a bit above room temperature, between 90 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 35 degrees Celsius, and then dissolve the yeast in it and let it sit for about 10 minutes or until it starts to foam. You can also add a little bit of sugar in there to really get it going. But once you know that it's nice and active, add in all of the sugar and the eggs and whisk to combine. Then stir in the lemon zest and the anisette. In another bowl, or in the bowl of a stand mixer, you're going to want to use a stand mixer if you got one for this. Whisk together the flour and the salt, and then add the milk and yeast mixture and mix it up until it comes together to form a dough. Then, little by little, add the lard or the butter and knead the dough until it's soft and smooth. Then place it in a bowl and cover, letting it rise until it doubles in size, about 45 minutes. Once risen, place the dough on a lightly floured surface and stretch it into a rectangle. Then place it on a lined baking sheet and cover it lightly and let it rise for another 30 minutes. Now during that second rise, go ahead and preheat your oven to 350 Fahrenheit or 180 Celsius and pour yourself a glass of cava, the traditional Catalonian sparkling wine that is often drunk with the coca de San Juan. It's also the perfect drink to learn a little bit about the festival of St. John. That Time for History segment was also new. Anyway, after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, Catholicism really started to spread across Europe, and they had to battle with the pagan holidays that were being celebrated, and they did so mostly just by reskinning them with people from the Bible. One of these holidays was Midsummer, or the summer solstice, longest day of the year. Now, Jesus' birthday had been set as December 25th at least as far back as 336 AD, just around the winter solstice, which coincidentally is 6 months after the summer solstice, go figure. And in the Bible, there just so happens to be a very important person born about 6 months before Jesus. And behold, thy cousin Elizabeth, she hath also conceived a son in her old age, and this is the 6th month with her, who was called barren. And that wee bairn born to Elizabeth was John the future Baptist. The dates lined up, so they set his birthday at June 24th. Plus, while Jesus' birthday marks the point in the year when the days start getting longer, St. John's birthday marks the point in the year when the days start to decrease in length, which lines up with something that John himself said. He must increase, but I must decrease. Kinda perfect, especially before they started kind of messing with the calendar, making it so their birthdays are actually like a few days off the solstices, but don't worry about it. Now, as the Visigoth kings of the Iberian Peninsula converted from Arian Christianity to Catholicism, it was time to revamp some of those midsummer rituals to fall in line with this new Feast of St. John. Now, we don't exactly know when most of these traditions started, which have pagan roots and which don't, but there are some that we can pretty safely say were around before the conversion of the holiday. First, and perhaps most famous, are the bonfires, which I mentioned earlier. In Catalunya, there is a saying, "Sense foc no hi ha festa." Without fire, there is no festival. And they take that very seriously. In fact, in some towns in the Pyrenees, they would cut down the tallest tree and turn it into a big log. Then they would set it on fire, hoist it up onto their shoulders. I don't really want to picture how they're doing that, and parade it through the forest, shedding sparks behind them. Clearly, Smokey the Bear never made it to Catalunya. But in most of the region, they were content to have their bonfires in city streets or on the beach. And it was not limited to Catalunya. It was actually really happening all over, and still does, all over Europe. In 13th century England, a monk of Lilleshall Abbey wrote, "In the worship of St. John, men waken at even, and maken 3 manner of fires. One is clean bones and no wood, and is called a bonfire. Another is of clean wood and no bones, and is called a wake fire, for men sitteth and wake by it. The third is made of bones and wood, and is called St. John's fire." Today, the fires are augmented by children and adults alike setting off massive quantities of fireworks. But why? Why the fireworks? Why the bonfires? Why are they associated with this holiday? Well, for that, it's back to the pagans. Since time immemorial, the summer solstice has been associated with magic. Essentially, on St. John's Eve, you get +2 to any rolls made to cast spells or brew potions. And that's great if it's white magic or healing magic, but it's a two-way street. For that night, the veil between our world and the supernatural is at its thinnest, which means
goblins and ghoulies
and witches are on the prowl. And how do you ward off a witch? Well, with a bonfire, of course. And these witches of Catalunya did not fly around on broomsticks or vacuum cleaners. No, they would turn themselves into little bugs or birds and fly above their victims, dropping their potions onto them. So when an ember would fly off from the bonfire, it was thought to be a witch fleeing from the smoke and flames. But if the witch had got to you before the bonfire, then it was up to you to save yourself by jumping over the bonfire, sometimes multiple times. And the practice of fire jumping is still a thing that they do today. Not a good night to be an EMT, I'm sure. Now, another way to ward off witches was with herbs. On the vigil of St. John the Baptist, every man's door being shadowed with green birch, long fennel, St. John's wort, orpin, white lilies, and such like, garnished upon with garlands of beautiful flowers, had also lamps of glass with oil burning in them all the night. Note that one of those herbs was called St. John's wort, which gets its name from the fact that it was thought to be most potent when picked on St. John's Eve. And even in ancient times and medieval Europe, St. John's wort was also known as a fuga demonum, or devil chaser. It'd be a really good name for a cocktail. Now, just as a witch's brew was at its most potent during the solstice, so were those medicines of healers that were made with herbs and other magic. So if you had to get sick, mid-June was a good time to do it. Now, obviously, witches were a concern wherever you went, but they seemed to be more of a problem in Catalonia, where between the 15th and 18th century, they put on trial and killed more witches than any other region in the Iberian Peninsula. And what's surprising is you would think that these trials would have come from the Spanish Inquisition.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition!
But in fact, they were mostly local witch hunts. It was your friends and neighbors putting you on trial. And actually, if you were accused of being a witch, your best chance was to have your case escalated to the Spanish Inquisition. Because for most of the Inquisition's existence, it was the belief in witches that was considered heresy. So the person who was actually doing the accusing was more likely to be punished than the person who was accused. And I shouldn't find this surprising, seeing as it's a well-known fact that the Spanish Inquisition's chief weapon was surprise. Well, surprise and fear.
And an almost fanatical devotion to the Pope.
Now, while you or I might be down in the valley picking our St. John's wort on St. John's Eve, the witches of Catalonia were often picking mint, basil, valerian, and rue and dancing up at the peak of Pedraforca. And I guess the idea of witches holding a Sabbath on a mountaintop on St. John's Eve was not unique to Catalonia, because the original name of Modest Mussorgsky's Night on Bald Mountain, which should be playing right now, was St. John's Eve on Bald Mountain, albeit in Russian. And it was about witches holding a Sabbath and dancing up on top of Lisohoru. He also finished writing the piece on St. John's Eve. Ooh, spooky. Now, witches aside, there are other superstitions associated with the holiday in Catalonia. Those include lighting red candles to make love spells more potent, and running into the ocean, sometimes naked, in the middle of the night and letting waves hit your back. And this is done for either good luck, or for granting wishes, or for just washing the ick of the past year off you, which really ties into the whole John the Baptist thing. Actually, casting off bad juju is something that is associated with the holiday in general. In fact, in many places, you're supposed to start those bonfires by throwing on your old furniture and belongings, the things that you don't need anymore. It's kind of like Marie Kondo on steroids. If it does not spark joy, let it spark the fire. Now, after a night of fire jumping, warding off witches, and midnight dips in the ocean, you're gonna be hungry. And at some point, we don't know exactly when, but at some point, eating coca became the thing to do. There is no celebration if the fire is not high, if there are not a lot of kisses. Love cries out, let people sing. In the morning we will see the sun, and we will have eaten coca with yardons. Now, the coca started out round, symbolizing the sun, but as time went on, they started getting longer. Some people say that they need to be 2 units in length for every 1 unit in width to symbolize the twice as many hours of daylight versus hours of night at the summer solstice. I don't know. What I do know is that by the end of the 19th century, they were getting longer. Much longer. There are stories of villages competing to see who could make the longest coca, and it's described that they would make them so long that they would have to put them into like an open wood fire and bake half of it, and then pull it out, flip it around, and bake the other half. Then, the young men hoisted the cake on their shoulders and walked through the neighborhoods to show it off. Young men in their coca measuring contests. Some things just never change. Now, I don't have anything to prove, so I am fine with my more traditional 2-to-1 ratio of a coca, which should be about ready to decorate and bake. So once your coca has puffed up a bit, brush on an egg wash and decorate it with candied fruit and the pine nuts. You can also add a bit more sugar if you want a little sparkle. Then bake it for 20 minutes or until it's golden brown. And here we are, Coca de San Juan. So it smells awesome. It definitely has that kind of anise smell to it, which I worry because I'm actually not a huge fan of anise, but let's give it a shot. So I can taste the anise, but it is not overpowering. It actually smells more than it tastes. Granted, I got a piece of the fruit, so that sweetness really overpowers it. So I'm gonna just try a little bit just of the bread. Even then, it's not overpowering. The anise is there, but the sweet kind of covers it over a little bit. But it's also not particularly sweet. It's not as sweet as most like dessert breads. It's more like a brioche, but it's not as pillowy. It's a little bit more chewy, which I kind of like. It actually really reminds me of king cake, which I should do here on the channel. Very, very similar, especially with the candied fruit and the pine nuts, which the pine nuts are actually really good when just a little bit warmed like that. I was worried that the candied fruit would burn with all the sugar, but it doesn't. Maybe if it was at a higher temperature it might, but it really comes out perfectly, and actually it cuts through the candied fruit really, really well, which I'm surprised at. Mostly now, I'm just curious about the other flavors. I kind of want to make it again with the lardon or the chicharrones, because I think that would be kind of interesting. So thank you again to Juan and to all of my Patreon patrons, and if you make your own coco, which you should, make sure to share a picture with me on Instagram, and I will see you next time on Tasting History. I didn't think I liked candy fruit, but I was wrong. Oh my god.